My family told me not to worry. Just watch the kids while we're gone, they said. What they didn't know was that I booked a suite right next to theirs. The day they checked in, I sent 6 little guests to their door with a note, safe and sound. Love, Aunt Claire. The chaos that followed. Let's just say karma checked in early. I'm Claire Benson, and this is the story of how I stopped being the family's babysitter and became their biggest lesson. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. Monday mornings in Los Angeles always felt too bright. The sun spilled through my apartment windows before I was ready for it, sliding across the cream-colored walls, catching on the gold trim of the picture frames. My place sat 20 stories above Wilshire Boulevard. Quiet, minimal, the kind of space people assumed belonged to someone who had their life perfectly together. I brewed my usual black coffee, opened my laptop, and logged into my Hollister and Park inbox. The building was still asleep, but my inbox wasn't. 32 unread messages. 5 new meeting invites, one from my boss, reminding everyone to push harder for Q3. I scrolled through the notes, made a list, and told myself I was fine. I always told myself that. I took a sip of coffee and started adjusting a property proposal when my phone buzzed across the table. Emily Grant calling, my younger sister. Her name flashed cheerful green on the screen like it always did. I sighed and answered. "Hey, Em, Claire." "Perfect timing," she said in that sing-song tone that always meant she was about to ask for something. "So Mom's turning 62 in a few weeks, and we're planning something special for her. Everyone's chipping in. I just sent the total on the family thread. Can you send your part today?" "They want to book the resort early." I blinked at the spreadsheet on my screen. "How much are we talking?" Emily said the number as if it were pocket change. It was more than my last vacation had cost. "It's a little steep," I said carefully. She giggled, a quick, practiced sound. "Come on, it's for Mom. She deserves it. It's at the Silver Pines Mountain Retreat. You know the one in Colorado I showed you last year? Total luxury. It's going to be amazing." I opened my banking app. My balance stared back at me. It wasn't that I couldn't afford it. It was that they always expected I could. "Fine," I said, typing as we spoke. "You'll get the transfer in a few minutes." "Perfect." "Oh, and keep the first week of March open. Don't plan anything else, okay?" "Sure," I said, my voice flatter than I meant it to be. She paused. "Thanks, Claire. You're the best. Seriously, I don't know what we'd do without you." That was the problem. They didn't know what they'd do without me, and they didn't seem to care how much I gave up so they wouldn't have to find out. When the call ended, I stared at the family photo sitting beside my desk. We were standing in front of the Pasadena house sun. In our eyes, my sisters leaning against Mom, all of them smiling. I wasn't in it. I was behind the camera as usual. The invisible daughter. By 10, I was in the office, surrounded by the muted hum of keyboards and the smell of roasted coffee beans from the kitchenette. People waved at me when I passed. "Morning, Claire." "Hey, boss." You always look so calm, reliable. That word followed me everywhere. Work, family holidays, funerals. The person everyone could count on. The one who never said no. At noon, I joined a meeting in the glass conference room overlooking downtown. We discussed deadlines, budgets, and the usual corporate niceties. When my boss, Mason Reed, said Claire's the glue that holds this place together, everyone nodded. I smiled the same polite smile I used when people mistook competence for contentment. By the time I got home, the city outside had changed moods. Sunset painted everything in shades of orange and silver. I dropped my bag on the couch, kicked off my heels, and loosened my ponytail. The quiet was heavy, but familiar. I poured a second cup of coffee, decaf this time, and sat by the window. Below, traffic crawled, neon signs flickered on, and someone laughed too loudly from a nearby balcony. My phone buzzed again. A text from Emily. "Thanks, sis. Shout it, you're a lifesaver," I typed. "No problem." Then deleted it. The cursor blinked, waiting. I locked the screen instead. I turned toward the window, watching the city pulse below. For a long time, I'd believed that if I kept doing the right thing, if I stayed reliable and reasonable, things would eventually feel fair. But the older I got, the clearer it became. Doing everything right didn't guarantee that anyone would do right by you. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and let the water run until it turned cold. Then I stood in the middle of my spotless apartment, hands on the counter, staring at nothing. I thought about that photo again. The one on my desk, the one where I wasn't standing with them, but behind them. Maybe that was where I'd always been. Outside, the city lights came alive, one by one. I watched them flicker, and thought, not for the first time, that I had built a life full of windows but no doors. The phone buzzed again somewhere behind me. I didn't look this time. I already knew who it was, and what she'd say next. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, the sun had already dipped behind the Pasadena hills, leaving the sky streaked with violet and orange. The porch light was on the same one that had guided me home since I was 16. The white paint on the old Craftsman house had begun to peel in places, but my mother's hydrangeas were still perfect, trimmed into obedient blue and pink spheres. I grabbed the bottle of red wine and a box of macarons from the passenger seat, took a breath, and walked toward the door. Inside, the air smelled like rosemary chicken and warm bread. My mother, Margaret, was moving briskly between the kitchen and dining room, her small frame, quick, precise, never missing a beat. "Claire," she said without turning around, "you're just in time. Set the wine down, will you?" My father. Robert was in his usual chair at the end of the table, newspaper folded neatly beside his plate. "Look who finally escaped downtown," he said, smiling. "My busy city girl." "Hi, Dad," I said, leaning in to kiss his cheek. Margaret shot him a look. "She's not that busy for family, I hope. Work makes her forget where she comes from." I forced a smile. I didn't forget Mom. Just had a packed week, that's all. The table was crowded, my sisters Emily and Rachel with their husbands' kids running circles around the chairs, everyone talking at once. The kind of domestic chaos I hadn't been part of in years. Emily was trying to feed her twins, Rachel was cutting chicken for her 4-year-old, and my mother was telling a story about the charity luncheon she'd organized. At one point, my dad looked at me. "You still seeing that marketing guy?" "What was his name again, Ben?" I said. "We broke up. Months ago." "Oh, right." He folded his napkin. "Well, you'll find someone. Plenty of time left." I smiled tightly, the familiar ache in my chest pressing against my ribs. Time left for what? To fit in. To stop being the one who didn't need anyone. Dinner went on in waves of chatter and laughter. I let it all wash over me, nodding when spoken to, smiling when expected. For a brief moment I thought maybe this time would be different, just a nice family meal. Then Emily cleared her throat. "So, Mom, I confirmed the reservation today," she said brightly. "Silver Pines Mountain Retreat. The pictures don't do it justice." "Oh, wonderful," my mother said. "Everything is falling into place." I looked up from my plate. "Wait, you already booked it." "When are we going?" Everyone went quiet. Margaret laid her fork down with that careful grace she used before saying something she knew I wouldn't like. "Well, sweetheart, about that." Emily jumped in, smiling too widely. "We thought it might be easier if you stayed here with the kids. The resort's kind of full, and honestly, they adore you. It's just practical." I blinked. "Stayed here to babysit." "They don't see it that way," Margaret said quickly. "They love their Aunt Claire. And with you not having, obligations, it seemed natural." Obligations. I repeated, like husbands and children. No one answered. Rachel looked down at her plate. Her husband coughed into his napkin. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the twins giggling in the next room. Emily finally said, "You're always saying you don't like crowded places. This way you can relax and we can actually unwind. It's perfect for everyone. Perfect." The word landed like a slap. I stared at my mother. "So you're all going to Colorado and I'm staying behind with 5 kids under 10? Margaret's tone was sugar-sweet but firm. "It's not a punishment, Claire. You're just so good with them. And the resort's no place for little ones anyway." I could feel heat rising in my chest, the kind that comes when you've been insulted so often it's almost routine. "And you decided all this without asking me." Her eyes flickered with annoyance. "We didn't think you'd mind." The conversation didn't resume. Everyone found something else to focus on, plates to clear, glasses to refill. I looked around at the faces I'd known my whole life and realized how easy it had been for them to erase me from the picture. After a few minutes I stood. "I should go. Early meeting tomorrow." "Already?" my dad asked, sounding almost relieved. "Yeah." "Big project." Margaret rose just enough to kiss my cheek. "You always rush off. Try to slow down, dear. Life isn't all about work." I looked at her. Apparently it's about babysitting. For the first time that evening, her smile faltered. But only for a second. You'll do what's right, as you always do. I didn't answer. I gathered my coat, stepped outside, and felt the sudden bite of the cool Pasadena air. The sky was dark now, stars faint behind the city glow. I walked toward my car, the crunch of gravel under my shoes, the only sound. As I reached the driver's seat, I heard my mother's voice float from the open kitchen window. "She'll come around," she was saying to my father. "She always does." I sat in the car engine, off hands gripping the steering wheel. The porch light glowed across the yard the same way it had when I was a kid waiting for permission to come inside. They didn't need to lock me out anymore. They just needed to remind me that I didn't belong anywhere else. I started the car and drove away headlights, cutting through the quiet streets. Pasadena faded in the rearview mirror, but the weight in my chest stayed right where it was. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of traffic 20 stories below. The clock on the wall read 1:07 a.m. I sat on the sofa barefoot, staring at the blank TV screen. The city glowed faintly through the window, smearing light across the room, too soft to feel alive. I thought about that dinner. The laughter, the way no one met my eyes when Mom handed me my roll like a chore list. It wasn't the first time. It was just the first time I realized how rehearsed the whole thing was. When I was 16, I used to cook dinner for everyone while Mom worked late. "You're my little helper," she would say, pressing a kiss to my forehead before heading out. When I was 22, I skipped spring break to babysit Emily's newborn so she and her husband could reconnect. At 28, I took a second job to help Rachel with her car down payment because she said she needed a fresh start. Every memory was dressed up as love, but felt more like a habit I couldn't quit. I got up, went to the closet, and pulled out an old photo album from a storage box. The pages smelled like dust and faint perfume. In picture after picture, there they were, smiling arms around each other, kids on laps, cake on tables. And there I was, behind the camera. Never in the frame. The only photos of me were candids taken by accident, always with someone else's child in my arms. I poured a glass of wine. Opened my phone and scrolled through Facebook. Rachel's post was at the top of my feed. A photo of new suitcases and tiny swimsuits lined up on her couch. The caption read, "Family vacation loading." 30 likes, heart emojis, comments from family friends wishing them fun. No tag for me, not even an afterthought. I took a sip of wine. The bitterness settled somewhere behind my ribs. It wasn't jealousy. It was a kind of quiet realization that I'd been edited out of a story I kept trying to belong to. Around 8 sunlight slipped between the blinds and pulled me back from an uneasy sleep on the couch. I stared at the ceiling for a minute before grabbing my phone and calling Mom. She picked up on the second ring, cheerful as ever. "Good morning, honey. I was just looking at swimsuits online. Do you think turquoise is too young for me?" "Hi, Mom," I said, rubbing my eyes. "I wanted to talk about the trip." "Oh, of course," she said, distracted. I heard the clack of her keyboard. "Can you believe your sister found a nanny who charges $50 an hour? Outrageous. That's what I wanted to mention." I said quickly before she could move on, "What if I hired someone professional? I'll cover it. That way everyone can actually enjoy the trip, including me." The line went quiet for a second, then her tone shifted. "A stranger?" "Absolutely not. You know how I feel about that. The kids are used to you, Claire. It would just be easier. Easier for who I asked. For all of us," she said simply. "You like peace and quiet anyway. I thought you'd appreciate the time." "Mom, I never said I didn't want to come." "Well," she sighed, "you're so busy all the time. It just seemed natural. Honestly, it feels like you're making a big deal out of nothing." "I'm not making a big deal. I just... Claire." Her voice sharpened. "You need to learn to put family first. We all make sacrifices. That's what family does." The call ended before I could answer. I set the phone down on the counter and stared at it. My fingers left faint condensation marks on the glass of wine still half full from last night. If family is everything, what am I in that? Everything. A function. A convenience. A shame they remember when something needs to get done. I sat back on the couch, legs folded under me, the room dim again. Even though morning light filled it, I looked at the framed photo on the wall. Mom and Dad, at their anniversary dinner. Emily holding her twins. Rachel, pregnant, all smiles. I wasn't there. I'd taken the picture. The wine burned a little as I finished it. Outside, the city came alive again. Cars honking sirens, wailing somewhere far off. people heading to places where they belonged. I thought about calling Logan, maybe grabbing lunch just to talk about something that wasn't blood and obligation. But I didn't. I just sat there quiet, feeling the hum of the building around me. The day stretched ahead full of emails, meetings, responsibilities I could actually name, in a way that was comforting. Work never pretended to love me. It just asked for what it needed and paid me for it. The phone buzzed again. A group text lit up the screen. Family chat. Rachel had sent another message. Just booked the rental car. Can't wait. Heart emojis followed from everyone except me. I closed the thread. My reflection stared back from the black glass screen, tired, expressionless. For a moment I didn't recognize myself. I reached over, turned off the phone, and set it face down on the coffee table. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. The air conditioner clicked on a low hum, filling the space. I leaned back against the sofa and exhaled slowly. Somewhere, beneath the frustration, something else began to stir. A kind of stillness I hadn't felt before, like the pause before a match is struck. Maybe it wasn't anger. Maybe it was the beginning of clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to fit into a picture you were never meant to be in. The next morning, the office was bathed in the soft blue light that came through the glass walls. Hollister and Park had that cold, expensive stillness of a place where time only moved for money. I walked through the hallway heels, clicking against the marble floor, and people nodded as I passed. "Morning, Claire. You look sharp today. Same smiles, same small talk." It was comforting and exhausting all at once. My meeting with Mason Reed started at 9 sharp. He was already in the conference room when I arrived, sleeves rolled up, a cup of black coffee in hand. "You've outdone yourself on the Denver project," he said, scanning the report I'd sent at 2A. "The client's thrilled." "Glad to hear it," I said. He smiled. "You're the one person here who never drops the ball. Keep that up, and I'll have to promote you just to keep you from getting bored." I thanked him, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. Snow-covered mountains, the image of a family trip I wasn't invited to. I'd built an entire career out of being reliable, and somehow that had become the exact reason my family felt entitled to me. When the meeting ended, I stayed a few extra seconds watching the city skyline through the glass. The view reminded me of how distance could look beautiful if you were high enough above it. That afternoon, Logan Price texted coffee after work. "You look like you're about to quit civilization." I met him at a small cafe across from the office. The place smelled like roasted beans and rain. It had started drizzling outside, a rare Los Angeles mood I always loved. Logan was already there, leaning back in his chair, tie loosened. He'd been the company's legal counsel for years, the kind of man who listened before he spoke and rarely said something he didn't mean. "You seem off," he said as I sat down. "Family again." I laughed softly. "Always." He waited patient. I told him everything. The dinner in Pasadena, the way Mom had decided my role, without even asking Emily's cheerful entitlement, Rachel's silence. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he stirred his coffee and said, "They want you to babysit while they're at a luxury resort." Basically, he leaned forward, "You know, boundaries aren't just about saying no. They're about showing people what happens when they cross them." "I don't know how to teach anyone anything," I said, "especially not them." Logan smiled faintly. "Then maybe don't teach. Just demonstrate." We sat in silence after that. The rain picked up, tapping against the windows. When I finally stood to leave, he said, "Whatever you do, make sure it's for you, not against them." Driving home, the streets glistened under the rain. I stopped at a red light near a flower shop and saw a young mother inside holding her child on one hip while picking tulips with the other hand. The little girl tugged at her sleeve, whispering something that made the woman laugh. I watched them for longer than I should have, a strange ache blooming behind my ribs. I'd never wanted to be a mother. But in that moment, I envied the certainty on that woman's face. The quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. By the time I reached my building, the rain had stopped. I changed into sweats, poured a glass of wine, and scrolled through my phone. One of my coworkers had posted a photo on LinkedIn. Her team had surprised her with flowers, and a "proud of you" card for hitting a project milestone. The comments were filled with hearts and congratulations. I stared at the image for a long time, before locking the screen. No one had ever celebrated me without needing something in return. The apartment was silent again, except for the hum of the city outside. I opened my laptop almost without thinking, and typed Silver Pines Mountain Retreat into the search bar. Photos of snow-dusted cabins filled the screen. Dark wood, wide windows, the kind of place that sold serenity by the night. There was an option for Aspen Suites, a row of private luxury rooms detached from the main lodge. Each had its own fireplace balcony and private entry. I clicked through the gallery until I found the one that caught my breath. Aspen Suite 304. Big enough for two facing the pine forest, isolated, untouchable. I didn't plan it, but my hand reached for the phone. The resort's front desk answered after 2 rings. "Good evening, Silver Pines Mountain Retreat. This is Tessa speaking. How can I help you?" "Hi, Tessa," I said, my tone calm professional. "I'd like to make a reservation for Aspen Suite 304. For what dates, March 3rd through March 10th? Certainly. That's one of our premium suites. Shall I hold it under your name?" I paused. "Yes, but I'd like to request discretion. Please don't share my name with anyone, even if they're on another reservation." Tessa hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Understood. I'll mark it confidential. I'll pay in full now." I added. There was a faint click of keys. Payment confirmed. "You'll receive an email with details. Is there anything else you need, Ms. Benson?" "No," I said. "That's all." When the call ended, I sat back and let the quiet settle around me. The glow from the laptop cast light across the room, catching the reflection of my face in the dark window. I closed the computer and finished my wine. The glass left a faint ring on the counter, a small, imperfect circle, like a trace of something once full. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the reliable one. I felt like someone who finally had a choice. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just done being predictable. The week before the trip passed like any other, at least on the surface. I showed up to work, laughed at the right jokes, made my deadlines. No one at Hollister and Park had any reason to think I was planning anything more than another quiet weekend with my laptop and a bottle of wine. Monday morning, an email popped up from Rachel. The subject line read, "Trip Prep." Inside was a bulleted list: snacks, toys, diapers for Lucy, and maybe some activities for the twins. "You're the best." "Claire," I typed back. Of course, already on it, then sat back in my chair and smiled to myself. They had no idea what on it meant this time. During a break between meetings, I called the Silver Pines Mountain Retreat Silver Pines. "This is Tessa Morales. How may I assist you?" "Tessa? Hi, this is Claire Benson. We spoke last week. I booked Aspen Suite 304. "Oh yes, Ms. Benson, I remember. Everything's ready for your arrival." "Actually," I said, glancing around the empty conference room, "I wanted to run something by you. It's a little unusual." I told her the story. The dinner, the assumption, the guilt trip disguised as love. By the time I finished, she was laughing softly on the other end. "I've worked here 15 years, she said, "and I've seen every kind of family drama. But this is the most polite revenge I've ever heard." "I'm not trying to be cruel," I said. "Just clear." "That's the best kind," she replied. "Let's go over logistics." For the next 20 minutes, we worked out the details, like two professionals finalizing a contract. I would have the signed authorization from my mother, allowing me to travel with the children for the family's convenience. I would board the earliest flight to Denver, arriving at the resort ahead of them. Upon arrival, the kids would be dropped off with the front desk bags labeled a note attached, delivered safely to the Benson family. Tessa's tone stayed warm but practical. "Our staff will handle everything discreetly. No one outside the front desk needs to know a thing." "Perfect," I said. "And you'll make sure they're comfortable until the family checks in?" "Of course," she said. "But I have to ask, what will you do while they're sorting that out?" I looked at my reflection in the office window, the city glittering behind me. Whatever I want. That night, I spread my suitcase across the bed. My packing was methodical, deliberate. 1 navy dress, 1 white blouse, a soft gray sweater, the Essentials laptop camera book of poetry. I'd never finished a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon I'd been saving for a special occasion. Maybe this counted. On the dresser, I lined up 6 small tote bags, 1 for each child. Inside each, I placed snacks, coloring books, small toys, travel wipes. Everything a responsible aunt would have prepared. I wrote their names neatly on tags: Harper, Eli, Lucy, Josh, Mia, Ben. Mia. My handwriting looked calm, almost affectionate. It struck me then how easy it was to keep doing the right thing, even when you'd stopped caring about being thanked for it. I checked my email again before bed. Another message from Emily had arrived. Just a reminder, don't forget extra sunscreen for the kids. Thanks again, sis. You're a lifesaver. Lifesaver. That word again. I closed the laptop. The next day at work, Mason stopped by my desk. You're taking time off next week, right? Yeah, family thing. He smiled. Good, you've earned it. I nodded, thinking how right he was, but for all the wrong reasons. Wednesday night, I sat on my couch with a glass of wine and called Logan. He picked up on the second ring. I was starting to think you forgot about me. I'm incapable of forgetting lawyers, I said. He laughed. So, did you talk to them yet? No, there's nothing left to talk about. His tone softened. You're really going through with it. Yes. He hesitated. You sure this won't make things worse, Logan? I said quietly. It's already worse. I just finally noticed. He sighed. Fair enough. Just promise me one thing. Find peace in it, not power. That's the plan, I said. Peace first. Power's just the byproduct. After the call, I sat for a long while listening to the hum of the city. My apartment felt both too big and too small at once, like a life I'd outgrown, but still fit inside. Friday came fast. I finalized a few reports, set my out-of-office reply, and shut down my computer. See you in a week. I told my team, who cheered, thinking I was off to some well-deserved rest. That night, I double-checked my flight details and printed copies of everything. Boarding passes, resort confirmation, the signed authorization from my mother. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd practically handed me permission for what was about to happen. Before bed, I took one last look around the apartment. Every surface gleamed, every book in place. I liked things orderly before I left anywhere, even if I didn't plan on coming back the same person. I texted Logan one last time. Leaving tomorrow. Early flight. A few seconds later, he replied, You sound calm. I am. Then you're ready. He wrote back. I put the phone down and turned off the lights. In the darkness, I could hear the faint hum of planes overhead cutting through the night sky. I pictured mine among them, already slicing through clouds toward the mountains, where snow fell over a resort that didn't yet know what was coming. They trusted me with their children, and they were right to. I'd take care of everything. Just not the way they imagined. The morning air was cold enough to sting when I stepped outside. The sky was still that pale gray between night and dawn, the kind that made everything look softer than it really was. I zipped up my gray coat, pulled the suitcase handle, and locked the door behind me. The sound of tires on wet pavement drifted closer. Before a silver minivan stopped in front of my building, Emily climbed out first, hair pulled into a messy bun phone in one hand, travel mug in the other. Rachel followed from the passenger seat, balancing 2 backpacks, while a swarm of little bodies spilled out behind her. 6 kids in total, all bundled in bright jackets, dragging tiny suitcases across the sidewalk. Their laughter echoed off the concrete. Morning Emily chirped like she wasn't about to hand me her entire life for a week. Traffic's already crazy. You sure you're okay flying alone with them? I smiled. I'll manage. Rachel approached, fumbling in her purse. Mom said to give you this, she said, handing me a folded piece of paper. The airline sometimes asks for authorization when kids aren't with their parents. I opened it. Margaret's neat handwriting stared back at me. I, Margaret Benson, authorize my daughter Claire to accompany our grandchildren for travel to Silver Pines Mountain Retreat. Signed, dated, perfectly official. I folded it and tucked it into my coat pocket. Thanks, I said, keeping my tone light. This should make things easy. Emily crouched to hug her twins. Be good for Aunt Claire, okay? She's the best. They nodded solemnly, then immediately started arguing about who got the window seat. Rachel laughed nervously. They're just excited. It's their first big trip. I know I said, and I meant it, kids weren't the problem. It was the adults who came attached to them. As they loaded the last of the bags into my trunk, Emily turned to me. Our flight's at 1. You'll be there before us. Just text when you land, yeah. Sure, I said, though I had no intention of doing that. She hugged me quickly, a pat on the back that said duty more than affection. Thanks again, Claire. You're a lifesaver. Always am. I replied with a small smile. By 6:30 a.m., I was sitting at gate 24A with 6 sets of wide eyes staring at the planes outside. I handed out snacks, refilled water bottles, and played the role I'd been assigned so many times before. when the flight attendant smiled at me as we boarded. "You've got your hands full." I just smiled back and said, "It's what I do." The kids behaved better than expected, lulled by cartoons and apple juice. At one point, Lucy, the youngest, fell asleep on my shoulder, her tiny hand clutching my sleeve. For a brief second, I felt a pang of something warm. Then I remembered that warmth was always the bait. When we landed in Denver, the air was colder, sharper. Snow gathered at the edges of the runway, a thin white line between where people stood together and where they stood alone. I guided the kids through baggage claim, collected our luggage, and found the driver holding a placard with my name. Tessa Morales greeted me outside the airport, exactly as poised as I imagined from her voice. Mid-40s calm confidence in her eyes. Black hair pulled back into a bun. She shook my hand. "Ms. Benson. Welcome to Silver Pines. The car's this way." The SUV smelled faintly of pine and leather. The kids chatted in the back seat about snowmen and hot chocolate, while I watched the city fade into mountains. Tessa glanced at me from the driver's seat. "So she said you really plan to go through with this?" "Yes," I said. "I'm just returning responsibility to its rightful owners." She smiled. "That's one way to put it." The drive took 2 hours. The resort appeared suddenly between the trees, all wood and glass, with smoke curling from stone chimneys. It looked like a picture-perfect escape for people pretending to be happy. We checked into Aspen Suite 304 first. The suite was even more beautiful than the photos. Vaulted ceiling, pale wood walls, a fireplace already glowing, and a wide balcony overlooking a forest so quiet it didn't seem real. I walked to the window and watched the snow drift lazily to the ground. For the first time in weeks, I felt my chest unclench. Tessa cleared her throat gently. "You can relax here for a bit. I'll arrange for the bell staff to deliver the luggage when the rest of the family arrives." "Thank you," I said. "And the other thing?" She nodded. "Already coordinated. When Mrs. Benson checks in, our concierge will deliver the children and their belongings to her suite exactly as instructed." I let out a slow breath. Perfect. An hour later, I helped the kids unpack their snacks and coloring books in the lounge near the front desk. They were content, blissfully unaware of the choreography unfolding around them. When Tessa returned with the final papers, I signed them carefully. Delivery confirmation timestamp initials. At noon, I received the message I'd been waiting for. Benson family checked in. I stood by the window of Aspen 304, watching through the falling snow. Somewhere across the property, a door would open, and 6 familiar voices would echo into the air. I poured a glass of red wine, the sound crisp against the quiet. "Right on schedule," I murmured. Tessa appeared at the doorway, her coat dusted with snow. "Everything's been handled." "They're surprised." I turned to her, glass in hand. "I imagined so." She hesitated, then asked softly, "How do you feel?" I looked back out the window. The snow was coming down heavier now, erasing footprints almost as soon as they were made. "Lighter than I expected." Tessa smiled faintly. "That's usually how justice feels." She left me there standing by the window, the wine warming my hands, while the mountains swallowed the sound of the wind. After years of being everyone's solution, silence had never felt so deserved. Not everyone gets to know what it's like to finally stop explaining themselves. I did. Snow blanketed the roofs of Silver Pines, like frosting on a wedding cake, untouched and painfully perfect. Around noon, the air outside the lodge shimmered in that sharp mountain sunlight that made everything seem quieter than it really was. I imagined the stillness would break soon. Down the path from my suite, a resort employee pushed a brass luggage cart toward the Benson cabin. On it sat 6 small suitcases stacked neatly beside 6 even smaller bodies. Harper Eli, Lucy, Josh, Mia, and Ben stood in a crooked line, bundled in puffy coats, their cheeks pink from the cold. Each wore a name tag printed in clear block letters. Each carried a tote bag labeled "Love" from Aunt Claire. From my window at Aspen 304, I could see the moment the cart stopped. The staff member knocked politely. A few seconds passed before the door opened, and my mother appeared. Hair perfectly styled, sweater pressed, expression soft until she registered what she was looking at. The smile slid right off her face. The concierge said something I couldn't hear, but I could imagine it. "Mrs. Benson, these are the children Ms. Claire asked us to deliver. She sends her regards and hopes the family enjoys their stay." The door froze half open. Inside, Emily's voice rang out muffled through the snow. You're kidding, right? Then came Rachel's soft and confused mom. What's happening? My father appeared in the doorway a moment later, robe tied tight, irritation already blooming across his face. What kind of stunt is this? The concierge kept her professional smile, handed Margaret a clipboard to sign for receipt, then turned and walked away before anyone could argue. The kids, realizing they weren't moving anywhere else, began to whine. Within seconds, Harper started crying, and Lucy followed suit, clinging to Rachel's leg. I could almost hear the pitch of Emily's voice rise. The same sharp defensive tone she'd used her entire life whenever something didn't orbit her. Back in my suite, my phone started to buzz. The first call was from Emily, then another, then Mom, each one lighting up the screen with their names and faces all familiar, all predictable. I silenced it. Then I pressed Do Not Disturb. The sound of the mountain wind filled the space instead. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down in the armchair by the window. The snow fell lightly now, little flakes catching in the reflection of the fireplace. My hand didn't shake, my heart didn't race. For once, there was no guilt, no panic, no instinct to apologize. I hadn't run away. I'd simply stopped showing up for a role I never auditioned for. Another call came through, briefly flashing across the screen before disappearing. Then texts, half a dozen, the bubbles stacking faster than I could read them. What did you do? Are you serious? Pick up right now. I turned the phone face down on the table. Across the resort, I could hear faint echoes. Voices raised, footsteps thudding against wood floors, doors opening and closing. It carried through the still air like a memory. The landline in my suite rang. I ignored it at first, assuming it was housekeeping. Then I heard Tessa's voice over the intercom. Ms. Benson. You might want to know, your family just called the front desk. I smiled slightly. And they're upset, she said delicately. Your mother's demanding to speak to management. Apparently, I swirled the wine in my glass. Good luck, Tessa chuckled softly. Don't worry. I told them the truth. That you were authorized to escort the children, and that you've safely delivered them to their legal guardians. I also reminded them that our staff's priority is guest safety. And the kids I asked, they're fine. Hungry, a little confused, but fine. I nodded. Then everything's as it should be. The line went quiet for a moment before Tessa said, You know, I see a lot of families here. Most of them think happiness is about pretending. What you did, it's not cruel, it's honest. And that's rarer than kindness. Honesty's expensive, I said, but I can afford it now. We said goodnight, and I hung up. Outside dusk had begun to sink behind the ridge. The smoke from the Benson cabin's chimney curled upward in uneven streaks. I could almost picture what was happening inside Emily, pacing Rachel, trying to soothe the kids, my father lecturing my mother, dialing every number in her phone, like outrage might rewrite reality. I stepped onto the balcony wineglass still in hand. The cold hit immediately sharp and cleansing. My breath rose in thin white clouds as I leaned on the railing. Across the snow I could hear it faintly. Children crying, doors slamming. My name shouted once, twice. I took a long sip of wine and let the sound fade into the wind. Justice, I realized, doesn't always need to roar. Sometimes it just needs a single open door, and the silence that follows. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one fixing the chaos. I was just watching it return to where it belonged. By late afternoon, the quiet order of Silver Pines was gone. From somewhere down the hall came the unmistakable sound of chaos, children crying, doors slamming, adult voices rising and overlapping until it was hard to tell who was shouting at whom. I sat by the window of Aspen 304, the noise carrying faintly through the snow-filtered air. If I closed my eyes, I could almost picture the scene. Emily's voice sharp and fast. I told you, Mom. You've been too soft on her for years. My father's deep baritone trying to overtake hers. Enough, Emily yelling, won't fix anything. Then my mother's brittle tone cutting through it all. Don't you dare blame me. You're the one who handed her the kids. Who told you to trust her? I imagined Rachel sitting apart from them, arms around her toddler. Eyes rimmed red. Maybe she just wanted to be with us, she would say quietly. Emily's reply would be immediate and cruel. With us? She wanted to humiliate us, and maybe that was true depending on which version of me they'd invented to make sense of this. The ungrateful daughter, the bitter sister, the lonely woman proving a point. They needed a villain. I was simply convenient. A knock echoed faintly through the corridor. A man's polite voice followed, muffled by the heavy wooden door. "Excuse me, could you please lower your voices? Other guests are trying to rest." Margaret, no doubt standing tall, would answer with that cutting tone that had frozen me more times than I could count. "I want to speak to your manager." I smiled slightly. Across the resort, Tessa would be in her office radio, pressed to her ear, calm as a winter lake. Everything is in order, she'd tell her staff. "Ms. Benson has legal authorization to travel with the children. We've followed procedure. The matter is closed." The phone in my suite buzzed once, then stopped. I didn't need to answer to know what was being said on the other end. I picked up my pen and opened my notebook. The pages were mostly blank except for one sentence I'd written the night before: "Silence isn't surrender. It's strategy." I wrote beneath it slowly. "This isn't revenge. It's a lesson." Outside, snow began to fall again, thicker this time, turning the air opaque. The light from the hallway stretched across the carpet, soft and golden, and the muffled arguments from down the hall grew fainter, buried under the weight of the storm. When night came, I lit the small fireplace and sat on the floor watching the flames catch and curl. The resort had a strange peace to it, like a sanctuary for secrets, the kind of place where people came to fix things that had already broken too long ago to be mended. The landline rang once more. I answered this time. "Ms. Benson." Tessa's voice was calm, but low. "I thought you should know. We have the entire delivery on video. The check-in, the signatures, everything. Just in case they decide to make trouble." "They might," I said. "My mother doesn't lose gracefully." "I'll hold on to it," Tessa replied. "Consider it insurance." "Good," I said. "Keep it safe." After we hung up, I poured another glass of wine and stood by the balcony doors, staring out at the heavy snow. Across the property, the lights from the Benson cabin flickered wildly, the silhouettes inside, moving back and forth like shadows on a stage. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to earn my way into those lights, trying to be seen to be enough. And now, finally, I was watching from a distance. And it was better this way. 2 days later, the story began to spread. It started small. A message between resort employees, a laugh shared over coffee in the break room. Then someone posted the security clip to a private staff group online. A few hours later, it leaked onto social media. The video opened with the concierge standing outside the Benson door. Snow falling, 6 children lined up like a parade of innocence. My mother's shocked face. Emily's furious gestures. The caption read simply, "The babysitter's revenge." I didn't find out until that evening, when Logan sent me a link with no message attached. I watched it once in silence. The internet loved it. Comments flooded beneath the video. "Good for her. Boundaries are beautiful. Family doesn't mean free labor. Others were less kind. Cold-hearted, cruel." Probably single for a reason. I closed the tab before the words could stick. I hadn't wanted this. I hadn't needed an audience. Karma, it seemed, had better marketing than I did. When I turned off the laptop, the room was filled only with the faint crackle of the fire. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the warmth against my legs, and let my mind go quiet. They would call again. They would rage, rationalize, rewrite, but I wouldn't answer. Some storms clean more than they destroy. Outside, the snow kept falling soft and relentless, burying the footprints that led to their door. 3 days after the video went viral, my phone turned into a machine that wouldn't stop vibrating. Notifications stacked like falling snow. Texts, calls, DMs, emails from strangers who suddenly had opinions about my life. Some were kind. "You were right to set boundaries. Thank you for doing what so many of us can't. You're my hero, Aunt Claire." Others less so. "You're heartless. Those poor kids. Family is forever, you should be ashamed." I turned the sound off, but the messages kept coming. Ping, buzz, flash, over and over, the same cycle of praise and outrage. I didn't answer a single one. By noon, I got an email from someone named Heather Collins. Her signature line read, "Columnist, Family and Justice, The Atlantic Online. Hi. Claire." It began. "I'd love to interview you for a feature on modern boundaries and generational family dynamics. Your story has struck a chord. People are calling it the babysitter's revenge. But I think it's more complicated than that." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Hi, Heather. I appreciate the offer, but there's nothing left to say. The story already told itself." "Best, Claire. I hit send and shut my laptop. Half an hour later, Logan called. "You've seen it, right?" "The video." "Yes," I said. He exhaled into the phone. "You're trending, Claire. Do you realize that there are threads dissecting your family like it's a case study? And legally speaking, they could argue defamation." "I didn't post anything," I reminded him. "They created the storm. I just stopped holding the umbrella." He was quiet for a moment. "That's poetic," he said finally. "And probably true. Still be careful. People don't like being forced to look at themselves." "I know," I said. "That's why mirrors are always the first thing to break." In Pasadena, meanwhile, the family was imploding. Emily called, but I didn't answer. Later, Logan forwarded me an email someone had leaked from a close family friend. It described a crisis meeting at my parents' house. My mother fuming, my father pacing Emily, screaming, Rachel crying. I could hear it in my head. Emily: "We're a joke now." Mom: "Everyone's laughing at us." Margaret: "If you'd listened to me, this never would have happened, Robert." "Enough. Arguing won't fix this." Rachel: Maybe she didn't mean to embarrass us." Emily: "Don't defend her." She knew exactly what she was doing. That was the thing about my family. They were never sorry for what they did, only sorry that someone had noticed. I thought maybe Rachel would reach out, but she didn't. Silence. I realized was the only language we all shared now. The fourth morning after the leak, I drove to Santa Monica. The air there always felt cleaner, like the wind didn't care who you were before you arrived. I kicked off my shoes and walked along the shoreline, letting the cold water sting my ankles. The sky was gray, the waves restless. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket over and over. I ignored it. A little boy ran past me, chasing a gull, his laughter cutting through the steady roar of the surf. His mother followed behind, calling his name, smiling when she caught up. The sound of them, so simple, so honest, hit me harder than I expected. I sat on the sand knees, drawn up, the wind whipping through my hair. My phone buzzed again. I pulled it out, looked at the caller ID. Mom. I let it ring until it stopped. Then I turned the phone off completely. I watched the tide roll in and out, waves folding over themselves in perfect, endless rhythm. For the first time in weeks, I could hear my own thoughts without anyone else's voice drowning them out. They'd always told me that family meant sacrifice, that love meant saying yes even when you wanted to say no, but maybe love wasn't about giving everything until there was nothing left. Maybe it was about stopping before you disappeared completely. The water crept closer, brushing against my toes, cold and grounding. I whispered into the wind, not sure if I meant to say it out loud. I can finally hear my own voice. It didn't sound angry. It sounded alive. Behind me, the beach stretched empty for miles, footprints already fading in the wet sand. I stood up, brushed the grains from my jeans, and started walking again, the horizon pulling me forward with every step. The tide rolled in, erasing the marks behind me. Some things I thought were never meant to be followed back. A week later, walking into the office felt different. People still said good morning, still smiled. But there was a hesitation in the air, like they were watching a movie that had suddenly become too real. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me as I crossed the lobby of Hollister and Park Heels, clicking against the marble floor that used to sound like confidence. When I reached my desk, there was a single sticky note on my monitor. Mason wants to see you. No signature. No smiley face. Just a message that looked like it didn't want to exist. The elevator ride up to the top floor was silent, except for the hum of the cables. When the doors opened, Mason Reed was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at downtown Los Angeles. His reflection in the glass looked tired. "Claire," he said without turning around. "Come in." I closed the door behind me and sat down. His office was spotless, modern, steel and light wood, a carefully curated calm. He finally faced me. "You know why you're here?" I nodded once. "The video." "Yes, the video," he said, pacing behind his desk. "You've seen how it's spread. It's everywhere. Twitter, LinkedIn, morning talk shows. Some of our clients have already asked if the Claire Benson in that video is our Claire Benson." "It's not my video," I said evenly. "I didn't post it. I haven't spoken publicly about it. I haven't even commented." He studied me. "I know that. But perception doesn't care about facts. Some of the shareholders are nervous. They think this could make us look unstable. I almost laughed. Unstable. For having boundaries. He smiled faintly like he wanted to agree, but couldn't. You and I know what really happened, but when a story catches fire, people only see smoke. There was a long pause. I met his eyes. So what do you need me to do? He leaned forward on the desk, fingers laced together. Nothing. That's the point. Don't respond. Don't clarify, don't play defense, don't play. Let the noise burn itself out. I waited for the other half. The warning, the quiet threat that came after praise. It never came. Instead, he said, "Between you and me, a lot of people here think you're, well, kind of a hero. You did what most people fantasize about. You stood up to the story that always keeps us quiet. That surprised me." Mason smirked slightly. You know what the irony is? If you'd staged that on purpose, if it were a marketing stunt, we'd probably be celebrating you right now. I couldn't help it. I laughed, soft and disbelieving. So what now? HR seminar on emotional boundaries. Maybe he said, still smiling. Or maybe we just let people draw their own conclusions. For what it's worth, I'm not worried. I think you'll come out of this just fine. When I stood to leave, he added, "Don't let the media decide what this story is. You already know the truth. Stay in control of that." I nodded. Thanks, Mason. Walking back toward the elevators, I felt the tension in my shoulders start to ease. The door closed behind me, and for the first time in weeks, I exhaled without feeling like the air would turn into glass. I'd always been afraid of losing everything if I ever said no. But now I knew. The only thing I'd lost was the act of pretending. That night, my apartment was quiet again. The kind of quiet that wasn't lonely anymore. I made tea instead of wine, the steam curling into the lamplight. My laptop sat open on the table, the screen glowing with a new headline. It was from Heather Collins. Woman outsmarts her family's manipulation. I hesitated before clicking. The article was long, thoughtful, written with the distance of someone who saw both the pain and the pattern. She described families like mine, not monsters, but architects of guilt. The way they build love like a contract, with invisible fine print. The last line stopped me. Not everyone is brave enough to walk away from a toxic circle. But once they do, they never walk back the same. I read it twice. Below the article were hundreds, no thousands, of comments from women. This is my story. I needed to hear this. I wish I had her courage. And between all those confessions, a few quieter voices. Maybe it's not revenge. Maybe it's recovery. I sat there scrolling through the words, a strange calm spreading through me. For years I'd believed I was the only one silently carrying the weight of being the reliable one, the caretaker, the peacekeeper. Now I realized I was just one of many, each of us learning that strength wasn't obedience. It was distance. Outside, the city lights shimmered across the skyline, reflecting on the window pane. Los Angeles looked softer that night, less like ambition, more like forgiveness. I closed the laptop, the glow fading to black. The tea had gone cold, but I didn't mind. Sometimes quiet isn't the absence of noise. It's the sound of finally being free. The rain had been falling since morning, a steady rhythm against the windows of the small cafe on Colorado Boulevard. Pasadena always looked softer in the rain, less polished, more human. I spotted my mother before she saw me sitting near the back, hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Her posture was smaller than I remembered, her hair slightly gray at the roots. I took a deep breath and walked over. She looked up as I approached, eyes, tired, face unreadable. "Claire," she said simply, as if testing whether my name still belonged to me. "Mom." I sat across from her. For a long time neither of us spoke. The sound of raindrops filled the silence. A waiter passed by refilling cups, but we didn't move. Finally, she said, "You made us a laughingstock." Her tone wasn't angry. It was worse. It was the quiet disappointment she'd always used when words weren't enough to punish me. I met her gaze. "No, Mom. I didn't make anyone anything. I just stopped pretending." She looked down, stirring her tea, though she hadn't added sugar. "Do you know what people have been saying? That we're toxic. That you were right to humiliate us. I didn't humiliate anyone. I just let people see the truth." Her jaw tightened. I only wanted peace in this family. Peace, I said softly. That costs one person their freedom isn't peace, it's control. She flinched at that. For a second, I saw the flicker of hurt cross her face, but it passed quickly, replaced by the familiar armor of righteousness. You don't understand, she said, voice trembling slightly. Everything I've done, all the sacrifices, were for family. I nodded slowly. I know, but you forgot I'm part of that family too. You can't keep asking me to give until there's nothing left of me to come home to. Her eyes met mine, sharp but uncertain. You think you're the only one who's tired? The only one who's given up things? I think I'm the only one who wasn't allowed to say no, I said quietly. We sat in silence again. Outside, a car splashed through a puddle. Somewhere behind us, someone laughed, the sound too normal for a moment like this. Mom looked out the window, her reflection overlapping mine in the glass. I don't know what to say to you anymore. I stood, pushing the chair back gently. You don't have to say anything, just understand. She didn't stop me when I turned to leave. By the time I stepped outside, the rain had softened to a mist. The air smelled like wet asphalt and orange blossoms from the trees lining the street. I walked slowly, letting the cool drops cling to my coat. That night, my phone rang while I was making dinner. Dad's name flashed across the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Hi, Dad. Hey, sweetheart, he said, his voice heavy. Your mother's not taking this well. She's been quiet for days. I'm not surprised, I said. She misses you. We both do. Maybe you could come by for dinner tomorrow. Just the three of us. I glanced at the clock. The pasta water was boiling over. I can't, Dad. I'm eating in tonight. He sighed. Claire, she's hurting. She thinks she's lost you. I turned off the stove, leaning against the counter. She hasn't lost me. She just doesn't own me anymore. He didn't know how to answer that. There was a pause, then a faint, defeated, all right. Take care of yourself. I always do. After I hung up, I set the phone face down on the counter and sat at the small table by the window. The rain had started again, gentle and steady. I poured myself a glass of wine and twirled the pasta. The silence of the apartment wrapping around me like a blanket. For the first time, dinner felt like a choice, not a duty. I thought of Mom's face, the disbelief when I told her peace shouldn't require a casualty. I didn't hate her. I wasn't even angry anymore. I just didn't have space left for her chaos. Forgiveness doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't need an announcement or a stage. It just needs the strength to stop reopening the same wound. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle, and the city lights blurred through the drops on the glass. I lifted my wine, the reflection of the streetlight flickering across the surface. For years, I'd eaten dinner with ghosts, expectations, guilt, unspoken debts. Tonight, it was just me, and that I realized was enough. By the time spring came back around, the snow in Colorado had already begun to melt, revealing the soft green beneath the pines. A year had passed since the chaos at Silver Pines Mountain Retreat, and I hadn't planned to return, but life has a way of bringing you back to the scenes that changed you. The drive up the mountain was familiar, almost comforting. The air still smelled of cedar and cold earth, but the heaviness I'd carried before was gone. When the resort came into view, framed by sunlight and the last streaks of winter snow, I caught myself smiling. Inside the lobby, everything looked new. Fresh flowers on the counter, new carpeting, but the same warmth hung in the air. Behind the desk, Tessa Morales looked up and broke into a grin the moment she saw me. Well, she said, wiping her hands on her blazer look, who's back? Didn't think you'd remember me, I teased. Oh, please. You're unforgettable around here. We're fully booked this season, but for you, Aspen 304 is always waiting. I laughed. I'm not here to make headlines this time, Tessa. I'm just here to actually rest. She smiled knowingly. Good. You deserve that. We talked for a few minutes about the resort's renovations and the unusually busy season. You know, Tessa added quietly, people still mention what happened. Not in a bad way. They call it the story that reminded them to set boundaries. With family, with work, with life. I think it helped more people than you realize. Maybe, I said, slipping my sunglasses onto my head. But I wasn't trying to help anyone. I was just trying to stop disappearing. She nodded. Sometimes that's exactly what helps the most. Aspen Suite 304 hadn't changed. The same pale wooden walls, the same wide window overlooking the forest. Only now the snow outside was patchy, dotted with patches of green, where life was quietly returning. I unpacked slowly, folded my clothes into the drawers even though I wouldn't be here long. Old habits die hard. The afternoon sunlight poured in through the curtains, catching the rim of a half-filled wine glass I'd set on the table. I opened my laptop, checked my inbox out of reflex, then laughed softly at myself. Old instincts die even harder. I clicked compose and began typing. 2. Logan. Price subject spring update. Hi, Logan. Just wanted to let you know everything's fine. The family's still quiet, and so am I. I finally understand what you meant last year when you said peace is the point, not power. You were right. See, I hit send and closed the laptop. Outside, children were laughing, snowballs flying across the courtyard, boots crunching in the slush. I stepped out onto the balcony, wrapped my cardigan tighter, and let the sound wash over me. Somewhere down there, another family was probably arguing about bedtime or sunscreen or who got to pick the next movie. And maybe, just maybe, there was an aunt keeping the peace. The wind carried the scent of pine and melting ice. My reflection in the glass door looked softer than it used to, still me but lighter. For years I'd believed revenge was about winning. It wasn't. It was about reclaiming the parts of yourself you'd given away just to keep others comfortable. Peace doesn't come when everyone apologizes. It comes when you stop needing them to. As the sun dipped lower, the mountains turned gold and the forest came alive with the sound of thawing streams. I sat on the balcony railing, sipping the last of my wine, feeling the weight of the past year fade into something almost gentle. For the first time, I didn't feel like the reliable one, or the forgotten one, or the fixer. I was just me, someone who had finally learned that silence isn't emptiness. It's space. Behind me, the suite glowed in the warm light, the fireplace crackling softly. I closed my eyes, breathing in the mountain air. Revenge isn't about hurting anyone. It's about returning to yourself after years of being lost in someone else's story. When I opened my eyes again, the last light of day was spilling across the trees. The snow was nearly gone, but the air still shimmered with the quiet that only comes after a storm. Sometimes karma doesn't look like punishment. Sometimes it just looks like peace. I set the empty glass on the railing and whispered almost to myself, respect shouldn't be a privilege. It's the bare minimum. And for anyone listening, maybe for the women still watching this story unfold, for the ones who've been told to stay quiet, to keep giving, to never make waves, if you've ever been made to feel small, remember this silence can be strength too. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is walk away.